solve this problem is that they're going to lie about their relationship as husband and wife. They're going to tell a half-truth, basically. She is kind of a sister of his, not the same mother, but they are married, and they're not going to reveal this to Pharaoh. So the threat, really, you have to keep this in mind. The threat is credible to Abram. But what's he looking at when he does this? Oh, and by the way, how old is Sarah at this time? At least 65, probably older, and she's still beautiful. A little longer. Yeah, the human lifespan is contracting down at this particular point. Prior to the flood, we're talking about people living 900 years and things like that, and then you get to the flood, and Noah only lived 600 years, and it's been contracting down there. Abraham's lifespan of 175 years and Sarah's lifespan of 127 years are both exceedingly long by our standards. Now, 120 years, if you take really good care of yourself and get a little bit lucky, is the maximum that a human being can probably live. And most of us don't do either of those things very well. But they're living longer there. So at this particular time, she probably looks a lot younger than a 65-year-old woman does in our day and time as well. She's still interesting, though. She's still beautiful, and she's still interesting enough to make this into a threat. So they resolve this thing without anybody getting hurt, and Abram and Lot leave Egypt as wealthy men. In Genesis 13:14, we get a little bit of story between them things. One of the problems that they had when they got back to Canaan is they had so much livestock, the land could not support them all. And the herdsmen began to fight amongst themselves, Abraham's versus Lot's and Lot's versus Abraham. And so the two decide to separate, and Abram allows Lot to choose where he will go, even though the land of Canaan was promised to him. He says, you pick. You go this way, I'll go that way. You go that way, I'll go this way. And of course, Lot chooses to go down to Sodom and Gomorrah. But God rewards Abram for the way that he handled it. So he had kind of a uncomfortable blip on his radar down in Egypt, but here he's done the right thing here and allowing Lot to choose which direction he's going to go. Unfortunately, Lot chose Sodom and Gomorrah. And then in chapter 14, a war between Canaanite kings results in the capture of Lot and his family. Some Canaanite kings to the north of Sodom and Gomorrah, they come down, they take all the cities, take all the stuff, take all the people, and they're heading back with all the booty. And Abram puts together his own military force. Remember, this guy's a shepherd. He's not necessarily a military commander or anything like that. He puts together his own force of roughly 300 men, defeats the Canaanite kings, and liberates Lot and his family from captivity, along with all the other prisoners that they had taken at that particular time. That impresses me, to be able to pull something like that off with that size of a force against kings. But that shows some bravery, some courage, some determination, and some skill. So the second giving of the promise is found in Genesis 15:1-19. God promises to shield Abraham and to reward him. And in verse 2, Abraham brings up a topic. He says, basically, I have no descendant, I have no heir, and a slave of my household is going to inherit all of my possessions, and that will be my heir. And God tells Abram that one will come forth from his own body. So we're getting a lot more specific about this, but one will come forth from Abram's own body and be his heir. And this is the first time that we read this phrase, then he, Abram, believed in the Lord, or believed God, it says in some translations, and he, or God, reckoned it to him as righteousness. Verse 6, yes. Genesis 15, verse 6. And Paul quotes this in Romans chapter 4. James quotes this in James chapter 2. So, what's happened so far? Go and I will show you. Here's some promises. We had the blip where the famine came up. We went to Egypt. We did this lie and were deceptive about our relationship. But we came back, let Lot pick his place. We have fought to rescue him. And we got this promise and nothing else at this particular point. We got signs here that says this is going to be a faithful man. And because Abram believed this promise at this time, that one would come forth from his own body and be his descendant, and through this descendant, this promise is going to come, this statement is made. Then he believed in to God, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. So that's what he has right now at this particular point. A little bit of action, faith, and a promise. Sound familiar? What do you have? What do I have? Faith and a promise. Hopefully, we got some stuff stacking up that shows that we're believing this promise, that we're wanting to act upon it. And that's part of what James has been talking about here in chapter 2 here, with faith without works is dead. But it's faith and a promise. Same basic situation as Abraham had. Any questions or comments? Yes? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. My fingertip is too fat for these buttons. So, now, a possible solution to this descendant predicament is found in Genesis chapter 16. And this is Abram and Sarah's attempt to resolve this problem of having no son of their own. Abraham is 86 years old, it says in chapter 16, verse 16. So Sarah was 76 years old. Now, even with an extended lifespan, there comes a point in a woman's life where childbearing is not a reality anymore. There comes a point in a woman's life when childbearing can be done, but it's a very chancy, risk. Basically, you get older, there's a point that you have to say, we're not having kids anymore. It's not safe, it's not right, or it's not possible. Sarah is likely at this particular point now because they've concocted this solution. So in accordance with the custom of that time and place, Sarah gives her handmaid, Hagar, to Abram so that Abram can father a child with the handmaid. According to the custom, then that child would then be Sarah's child. Short version, the plan worked. Ishmael is born. Spoiler alert, nothing else works out after that. And this is going to cause tension in the family when Isaac comes, and she's going to be tossed out of the camp, and her son are going to go, and he's going to become a great nation. But Ishmael does not interfere with the promise because he's not the child of the promise. The third promise is given in Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 through 27. At this time, Abraham is 99 years old when this promise is given, meaning that Sarah is 89 years old. At this point, both Abram and Sarah are past what we would call the menopausal point. Mom is not having any kids anymore. Well, it turns out that males aren't fathering any kids after this particular point. And so in Genesis chapter 17, verse 5, Abram's name, his name Abram means exalted father, is changed to Abraham, father of many. Is he father of many yet? No. God changed his name because he's telling him it's coming. The promise is coming, and you need a new name to describe this new relationship you're going to have. In Genesis chapter 17, verse 15, Sarai's name, princess, is changed to Sarah, also princess, but probably princess of the multitude, because in both cases, the name change is given is because you're going to become the father or the mother of a multitude. One writer said that Sarai's original name actually meant quarrelsome. And I raised a daughter, and yeah, they can be quarrelsome, but I can't see why anybody would name your daughter quarrelsome just because she's a little irritable sometimes. So I'm going to stick with princess on that. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's going to figure in. Quit peeking at my PowerPoints. So, yeah, the laughter figures in to what's about to happen, like in the next couple of PowerPoints. But that's not Sarah. Sarai means princess. So in Genesis chapter 17, verses 9 through 14, the sign of circumcision is given. Now, Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him in righteousness in Genesis chapter 15. Throat gets dry up here. Genesis chapter 15 and verse 6, at roughly the age of, say, 85, 86, something like that. And here at the age of 99, the sign of circumcision is given. Now, why is this important? Well, the sign of circumcision becomes a sign of the law of Moses and the covenant of Moses, the descendants of Abraham. A lot of Jews in the first century are taking a lot of pride in this, being descendants of Abraham, being circumcised, being us, and you guys are not us, kind of a thing here. And Paul is pointing out that circumcision didn't make Abram right with God. What made Abram right with God back in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 6 was Abraham believed God. All this other stuff is happening now because Abraham believed God. So it's not based on lineage, genealogy, resume, works, any of that other kind of things. Abraham believed God. So in Genesis chapter 18, verses 9 through 15, Sarah was kind of eavesdropping on this conversation that Abraham is having with the visitors from God. And they tell Abram that Sarah would give birth to a son in a year, and she laughed. This is kind of one of those sarcastic, sardonic laughs, like, no way is this going to happen. What are you thinking? Kind of a thing here. Then she tried to deny it. Interesting thought. In Genesis chapter 17, verse 17, when God tells Abraham Sarah's going to have a child within a year, Abraham laughed. Same sort of situation. There is just no way in this world that we're going to do that. Can I get to you in just a second? So Abraham laughed because how is it possible for a 99-year-old man to have a child with an 89-year-old woman? Okay, now, your point, your question, please? Yes, she is. And I'm trying to keep her story in this too, because this doesn't happen without her. That would be a very normal thing. Yeah, we would. But this, I think, is precisely the point. There is no way to interpret the birth of Isaac as anything other than God fulfilling his promise to them. If it happens any earlier, that's how people have been made for millennia, that kind of a thing. This is something special because of this. Yes, it does. It is a miracle or a near miracle at a minimum. This just doesn't happen. So this one I threw in here because this speaks well of Abraham's character. God is on his way to Sodom and Gomorrah when he stops in and tells Abram, Sarah, you're going to have a kid in a year. And he's going down to Sodom and Gomorrah to see for himself how sinful the cities are. And God tells Abraham what he is planning, and Abraham intercedes for the city. Think about that for just a second. Does he know these people down there? 2 of them, maybe 4. Lot and his wife, 2 daughters, perhaps other children. What's about their reputation? Well, God's going down there to see how sinful it is. Do you think Abraham might have heard something like that? I could see somebody look into this and say, go down and take them out. They're sinful, they're wicked. Just get these people off the face of the earth. But Abraham doesn't do that. He intercedes with a question. Wilt thou indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Now, one of the things you'll notice in intercessory prayer in the Old Testament is when people are interceding with God on behalf of somebody else, they always intercede from God's perspective. Will you do this thing? Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? He's not arguing, they're uneducated, they're untaught, they don't know any better, or cut them a break. It's been they had a rough year or 2 or anything like that. Will you do this thing? And Abraham negotiates the number from 50 down to 10. That speaks well of the man's character. That was his concern. Will you sweep away the wicked, or the righteous with the wicked? And in Genesis 18, verse 32, God says, I will not destroy it on account of 10. Find me 10 righteous people in the city, I will not destroy it. And then Genesis chapter 19 tells how Lot and his family were rescued from Sodom. They were reluctant to go, and Lot's wife violated the command not to look back at the city and was turned into a pillar of salt. But in Genesis 19, 27 through 29, Abraham gets up in the morning and looks out his tent, and he sees the smoke rising from the ruins of the city. how do you think he felt about that? He interceded for them, and he knew God was fair, and he knows this is painful. It's probably a horrible thing to watch, but there weren't 10 righteous people in the city. But he tried. He did everything he could, to persuade God to do it, and God agreed to it, and the terms were not met. Finally, this is the second deception. I'm going to give you this one briefly. This one takes place in the land of Canaan. Instead of dealing with Pharaoh, we're dealing with a Canaanite king called Abimelech. And it's the same basic thing. They're not talking about their relationship as husband and wife. But again, at this particular point, if this is in chronological order, and I believe that it is, but I threw this comment in there because Hebrew writers don't often write chronologically. If you look at the book of Jeremiah, he'll talk about in one chapter, well, this happened during the reign of Zedekiah, and then 2 chapters later, he's talking about this happened in the reign of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim was actually the king before. So he's not keeping a chronological order so they don't necessarily do that, but I believe that they are. Sarah might be 99 years old and still a looker at this particular point. And so they make this same basic deception here. God intervenes with Abimelech to keep him from touching Sarah until God has a chance to discuss it with him. And then he tells Abimelech, restore Sarah to Abraham, and all would be well. However, if Abimelech decides to keep her, he says, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. Abimelech made the smart choice here. God doesn't blame him for the deception or anything like that. He says, now you got to make a choice. You're going to keep her and die, or are you going to send her back to her husband? He says, yeah, I like this whole not dying thing, so I'll send her back to her husband. And he probably has a certain level of respect for God, perhaps as part of his respect for other pagan deities, but he does the right thing in this.
What they intercede, Abraham becomes wealthier.
Yes, he does. Yeah. That's kind of unfortunate. Yeah. The birth of Isaac is recorded in 7 verses, Genesis chapter 21, verses 1 through 7. The fulfillment of Isaac is The birth of Isaac is the fulfillment of the promise that was made almost 24 years earlier, beginning in Genesis chapter 12. The name Isaac derives from the Hebrew Yitzhak. There was a famous violinist, Yitzhak Rabin, world-famous violinist. That's Isaac. The way that it comes into the English is it was transliterated from the Hebrew into the Greek. It comes out something like Isaac, and then it was translated into the English, and it becomes Isaac. So that's where the name comes from. It means, pay attention, Ricky, one who laughs or one who rejoices. So because Abraham and Sarah both laughed when they were told you're going to have a child in a year, that's where he gets his name from. Both the meaning he who laughs and one who rejoices are highly appropriate given the circumstances of Isaac's birth. And I would propose to you, this might be the only case of a double pun in the entire Bible, where the child's name means he's laughed because they laugh, but it also means they rejoiced because it was the fulfillment of the promise. So that's kind of a nice thought, I think. But the bottom line was, 25 years after it was given, this promise was fulfilled. Took a while, didn't it? But Abraham had still the same thing he always had, faith and a promise. The offering of Isaac is found in Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 19. The command to Abraham to sacrifice Isaac was a test of Abraham's faith. He says, I'm going to see if Abraham fears God. This is the type of test mentioned in James chapter 1, verse 12, where it says, blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which is the Lord has promised to those who love him. Trials in James have come in two different ways. In James chapter 1, there was the various trials that we all encounter because we're human beings, and they're challenging us, but they produce endurance, and endurance makes us perfect and complete. And then there's this trial here where the emphasis is more on the fact that we're testing or assaying the value of a person's faith. So how pure is the faith? What kind of a quality is it here? And this is the type of thing that Abraham is going through. For Abraham, this particular command poses two dilemmas. Number one, Isaac is the son of promise. Through him will come a multitude of descendants. You know, if Isaac is dead, how many descendants come through Isaac? 0. So that's a problem there. The second aspect of this dilemma is kind of overlooked and not mentioned. God has never asked for a human sacrifice before. And in fact, if you go into the book of Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 32, verse 35, one of the reasons Jeremiah tells us that Judah and Jerusalem was judged is because, and they built the high places of Baal that are in the valley of Ben Hinnom to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire to Molech, which I had not commanded them, nor had it entered my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. This phrase, passing through the fire, that's not talking about singeing a little bit of hair off of them or making a quick pass through there and saying, "Are you okay, honey?" You know, it was a little bit scary, but, you know, the hair will grow back or anything like that. This is a burnt offering, is what he's talking about here. Molech, the cult of Molech, predates Abraham. We have archaeological evidence that the Canaanites and other people in that part of the world were sacrificing their sons and their daughters to Molech as early as 2200 BC. You will see this reading through the Old Testament, history accounts and things like that. You will find some of the nations around Judah and Jerusalem did this. So there's a bit of a challenge there. The bottom line is Abraham doesn't see how this is going to work out, but he leaves it in the hands of God to figure it out. God made a promise, descendants through Isaac. God said, "Offer up Isaac to me." How is this going to work out? The Hebrew writer, I want to mention this as well. Isaac was probably in his early 20s when this command was given. Abraham is, I think, around 130-something at this particular point. It'll be 120-something, about 125, I'd say. So if Isaac's in his early 20s, he's not going to tie this boy up and do this without Isaac cooperating. So Isaac had to willingly submit to this, knowing that he was the son of promise. So that's a thing to keep in mind. He has to trust his father. He has to trust his God, the same as Abraham has to do it. And so in Hebrews 11, 17 through 19, we read, "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. And it was he to whom it was said, 'In Isaac your descendants shall be called.' He considered that God is able to raise men even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type." They looked at it and he said, if I do this thing, God's going to raise him from the dead. And God stayed his hand before the knife was delivered. Isaac, as he mentions in the Hebrew writer Paul, mentioned this as a type. Isaac is a type for the sacrifice of Christ. Just as Isaac had to submit to this thing, Christ has to submit to this thing. And he does it for a greater purpose, just the same as Isaac had to do in his day and time as well. So, anything else? The Genesis account, final 100 years of the life of Abraham and the final 62 years of the life of Sarah. Sarah, 127 when she died. Abraham, 175 when he died. Unusually long lifespans by our reckoning. Now, at this particular time, we don't live this long. Kind of wish we did, but that's not happening. So, we don't know why they left Ur. We do know where they went when they did. We do know where they went after that. The driving force was always faith and a promise, and that's the thing that carried him through. So when James talks about Isaac being offered up as a sacrifice as a sign of Abraham's faith, he's offering that up to show the faith produced the works. The works gave the faith life. Faith without works is dead. Faith with works is alive and working. These were two, faith and works are never intended to be separated. You're not earning your salvation, you're not earning your merit or anything like that. Works should be done because of our faith. They will grow together with us as well. And you can see that and evidence of that in Abraham's life as well. So I need to give up the auditorium, so I appreciate your attention and your comments and your questions. Anything finally you want to get in before we dismiss?
Well, how long were they under the patriarch of Abraham? About how many years?
Well, that's, from Adam to,
Yeah.
From Adam to Moses, yeah. So you're basically, it depends on when Adam lived. I'm not really dead set on the idea of that being like 6,000 BC, but using that as an example, then you're looking at 40s. Yeah, yeah. So that's at least 2,500 years. So, okay. All right, we need to be done. So appreciate y'all